You're now live.
We are live. Senator Sarakian, I just told the committee that the appropriations would like this bill out by next Wednesday. I'm sure you've gotten equally exciting
I'm ready to
requests from you.
I'm ready to push back.
I told them no way, but we will try and get them a number so they can balance the budget. So today we're going to start with Commissioner Tierney and some discussion of Act 79, which was the Make Ready and Pole Harvesting bill we did last year, 2 years ago, 2 years at least. Okay.
Yeah, last year.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. June Tierney, for the record again, Commissioner, Department of Public Service. I know your time is at a premium, so I am going to ask Clay to make the presentation today that gets at your questions. I'm very pleased to see that you have Mr. Finn here today, because I think he can give you some real world input on the data gathering and how that has gone for EC Fiber. And of course, Ms. Hallquist, always very knowledgeable in the area too. From the regulatory perspective, I don't think we have had a lot of visibility into issues in the time since Act 79 passed. That's why I'm so pleased to see Mr. Flynn here. And I'm going to let Clay brief you on our observations so far. So go ahead, Clay.
Okay.
And you're on mute.
Yeah, Clay, you're muted.
Thank you, June. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Clay Purvis, for the record. I came prepared to talk about two issues. One is how the new pole attachment rules are working, and then the second is a little briefing on pole harvesting or pole data collection issues and considerations. With regard to the new pole attachment rules, the department had initiated a rulemaking petition in I think December of 2018 to modify pole attachment rules. And what we had sought in that petition was a move toward one-touch make ready. So this would speed up the deployment of telecommunications attachments on poles by allowing a neutral party construction company to move all of the attachments and do all of the preparation work on a set of poles to prepare those poles for attachment by the new provider. We were also responding to issues that some carriers had raised about deadlines for moving attachments being surpassed by the companies that were already on those poles. So if the incumbent telephone provider didn't go out and move their attachments down on time, this delayed new projects from getting completed. And often it would involve one or two poles in a pole set of 100 poles. You might have just one pole that needed something that wasn't getting done. So the other change was that these carriers could hire an outside contractor to do the work in the event that the work was not being done by the cable owner or the pole owner. Those rules went into effect. There were things added in Act 79 on those issues, and the rules went into effect in 2020. Since they've been in effect, we have not heard of many problems arising from the new rules. We also have not heard of very many instances where the rules are being invoked, the one-touch make ready, for instance. So our understanding is that for many of the companies that are attaching, putting new attachments on poles, that the rules have helped in that they're there if they're needed, but the fact that they're there has caused companies to better work together. So we've heard examples of where companies are working informally to allow the new attaching entity to move their attachments. Deadlines are being adhered to much better than they were. You should also know that during that time frame, Consolidated Communications sold the bulk of its pole assets to GMP. So we now have most of the poles in the state owned by the electric company, which from a telecom perspective is really a neutral party. And that's also been helpful. GMP has been very good about adhering to deadlines and working with carriers that want to go on poles. So I think the rules have been beneficial, but they have not been used widely across the state. Madam Chair, I'm happy to move to a short presentation I put together on pole harvesting if you'd like.
Yes, that would be, I think, unless we've got any questions at this point. Okay.
Several, Madam Chair.
Oh, you have several. Okay.
Well, just what was the date of the sale of the poles? From,
I don't know the exact date offhand. I can look that up for you. It was sometime
Okay.
in 2019.
It was in 2019.
Yes.
Okay.
and I want to understand from about the PUC's ruling about putting 25.3 up on Green Mountain Power poles for running 25.3 out, while the state policy is 100, and how that came to pass. But maybe this is not the best time during this presentation. So,
Is there a short answer?
I can give that short answer very
okay.
quickly. Last year at the outset of the pandemic, I had sent a call to arms out to all of the utilities. Madam Chair, you may recall I copied you on that, and Senator Ash as well, basically asking all the utilities in the state to do what they can do in order to help during the pandemic. And a variety of responses were received. I've also been doing a lot of work on convergence, which is the concept that our smart grid, our grid of tomorrow, is going to need greater capacity to process data as the Internet of Things gets traction. And all the projections in the studies are that the data needs are going to increase for our utilities. And so broadband becomes quite relevant in their space, because there are quite a number of ratepayers who do not have good connectivity and therefore can't share in the innovations and services that the utilities are developing in the name of making a smart grid available. So GMP and VEC both came forward with tariffs that are designed to kill two birds with one stone. One is to promote this idea of energy equity, where broadband gets to folks who otherwise have very little prospect of getting any kind of connection that would allow those sorts of innovative services to reach them. Think, for instance, battery storage and the like, and managing their power supply so that they can charge their vehicles, and that energy can be available for load control to the utility. And the second bird that gets killed is that this makes the attachment process expedited and available for CUDs and other attaching entities that are trying to get their plant, their facilities out to these places where folks otherwise really don't have good connectivity. And the standard that the utilities set in making their filings was 25.3, but that's a threshold. It's not a limit. It's not a requirement of the tariff. It's simply that 25.3 or better is what's getting connected. And the PUC did its process for tariff review. There was an opportunity for public comment. It was noticed, as any tariff is. The department weighed in. We were supportive of the tariff filing itself. We did note that it's a departure, and it's being done on a pilot scale basis, meaning it's for a limited period of time, 3 years. And the ultimate, the capped exposure, I think, at least in GMP's case, is $15 million is the max of what they would put into their rate base under this program if there is that much uptake. And the PUC then ruled in favor of it. Let's give it a shot, because it's this kind of innovation that we need to do in order to meet this need of convergence, and also getting out to those areas that just have very poor connectivity. I would keep in mind too that this work was principally done, the thinking behind it, before the CARES, not CARES, like the ARPA bill money was secured. So that's it in a nutshell.
Madam Chair, I guess that, well, when we went out of session, there was a request to the PUC to remunerate Green Mountain Power through some sort of credits to put up 25.3 or higher.
Senator, I think this is
Construction on
getting
the-
off the
It is
topic.
not, Madam Chair. We are discussing how we're going to build out broadband and 100, and
No,
my friend-
we are not, Senator. We are discussing pole harvesting and make ready. We can have this discussion
okay, thank you.
when we are doing the build
you.
out section, but I
Agreed.
have a lot of
Agreed.
witnesses and I
Thank you.
want,
Agreed. We will take it up when it's appropriate.
yes, you
So-
have mentioned it a couple times, so,
I have. Thank you.
yes, all right. So any questions for Clay at this point? All right, so I'm going to move it along to Mr. Flynn from EC Fiber. And there you are.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings, and I want to thank all of you on the Senate Finance Committee. You've really been digging very deep. You've been hearing a lot of information. Clearly some of it conflicting, and I know that you are you're working hard to make the right decisions for all of us in the state, and I really appreciate that. I take it that you invited me today because I was the one who came out last summer during the second session with an idea to do a statewide poll data collection with the CARES money. And the fact is that we were not able to appropriate CARES money for that activity, so it simply didn't happen. The extent to which any poll data collection has gone forward in the state that I'm aware of, EC Fiber, as I said last year, had to go and start collecting poll data for its new towns, and we've been doing that. And I think that a number of the CUDs, I'm not sure exactly how many, have done their own projects for portions of their district, or they have projects that are ready to go once they're funded. And I know that Jeremy Hansen, who's the chair of CV Fiber, who's up next, can speak to what's going on in his district. And Christine Hallquist, who's going to follow Jeremy, has a lot of experience in this area, obviously, and knows so much about these things. So I'm kind of a cheerleader, really. I just want to say that we need to. I think that we're pretty much all agreed that the goal is to get fiber to the premises throughout the state, that the CUDs are an important instrumentality to achieve that. I certainly, in my own personal reading, and I would say, I guess on behalf of EC Fiber and the CUDs, that we support the VCBA idea. We think that that's going to be where those resources get concentrated. But I think with that, I'll just be quiet, take questions.
Okay, so you're still going out and looking at each poll and documenting what's on it. But the Batmobile that was available last year, is that still something that could be used?
Hey, the Batmobile, the Google car, the
Yeah,
Gizmo,
that thing.
that thing. Yeah, well, After we realized that there was not going to be any CARES money, Stan Williams and Chris Recchia and I talked about, whether or not to give it a shot. And so we decided that we would try, because the upside was that we would jump months ahead. Otherwise, we were going to have to wait until now because it's a boots on the ground thing. Certainly, we have the financial strength to do it. By the way, I heard yesterday that we had $100 million in debt. That's not true. It's 50.
I thought it was 54, but I'm
Yeah,
not
it's
worried
54.
about that.
54. And our bonds are selling at a premium. They're selling way over
Okay.
par, 3.5%. So people
Right.
think we're solid.
I don't
Okay?
think anyone's worried about that at this point.
Okay.
That may be your competition, but
All right. I see Senator Pearson has a question.
Senator Pearson, you have a question?
Yeah, it was presented to us as 50 or 60 million as something that we should be deeply worried about. And I've been hoping we could talk about that. Can you?
As part of due diligence, I have asked the treasurer's department to talk to us about bonds and what happens if there is a problem with the bonds. And, but these are independent municipalities, but we will talk about that.
Well, I guess I would frame my question differently. It was presented, I mean, the House bill, a lot of our conversation has been about believing and investing in CUDs. Yesterday it was presented that that is an irresponsible approach. Just look at the debt load of EC Fiber. So I understand basically what happens when you default on a loan, but my question is, why is EC Fiber, I mean, is that a problem for EC Fiber or not? And if not, bring me some comfort, please.
Sure. No, it's not. We've got it plotted out. It's expensive to build fiber to the premises in rural Vermont. That's why people don't do it. That's why we needed a municipality to do it, because we can capitalize all this cost and pay it off over a 30-year period with low interest loans. We don't have to have an ROI within 5 to 10 years. We don't have to throw off cash for shareholders. So a lot of those expenses go away. There's all of our projections show that we are not going to have any difficulty running a surplus that's at least 1.25 times greater than our debt service cost. You can go to the Emma site, you can download all the paperwork, you can read those, scores of pages. There's lots of financial details, but I tell you that the market thinks we're fantastic. They're buying our bonds at 3.5%.
FX, are there comparable rural build outs that you can point to that say you're actually in line with other projects similarly situated?
Not that I have found. I'm familiar with a number of municipal efforts, but by and large, the model out there in the world seems to be that the municipalities build fiber and then rent access to it to private providers by and large.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Senator Brock.
Just a question, what was the starting interest rate on the bonds when they were issued?
Well, we've issued bonds every year for the past 5 years now. So they've gone out at a variety of rates. I think the highest was on the order of 6.75%, and the lowest was 4.5%.
All right, well, you mentioned 3%
That's
right now. Was
ballpark.
it 3% on all of your bonds or 3% on the most recent issue?
No, that's not what I said. I said that in the market right now.
That's what I meant.
If you go the most recent sales, the people who purchased the bonds
Mhm.
from their holder paid, $1.07 on a bond that had been issued at, $1.02 or whatever,
Mhm.
which reduced their effective interest rate to 3.5%. So people were willing to pay a premium to own our bonds. And that is a sign that our bonds are regarded as a very, good risk. If they were regarded as a poor risk, it would be going in the other direction. And our interest rates would be going up. Now, we think that once the district is all built out and we're in obvious clear sailing, that we're going to be able to refinance all those earlier bonds that are at 5 and 6%,
Mhm.
and get them out there at 4% or maybe even less. And at that point, we could actually be in a position to start thinking about reducing prices. I would also point out that we had enough financial wherewithal in our results last year that we felt that we had enough surplus that we could make a donation to Equal Access to Broadband of $100,000. And, we were still, our surplus, even after that expense, was well above the 1.25 mark.
Thank you.
So the bankers think we're doing fine, and the same bankers who got our bonds out there have been the ones reviewing a lot of the business plans of the CUDs. So there's a lot of intellectual and financial firepower that's going into the work that's being done out there. I really think you should have a lot of confidence in this model.
Any other questions? All right, Senator McDonald.
Since the subject is pole harvesting, FX do the co-ops, Vermont Electric and WEC, need to have pole harvesting, or would they be able to begin stringing fiber now with their own equipment if that was approved?
You're asking about the WEC area? Because I'll just say that WEC is in discussions with EC Fiber, CV Fiber, and Northeast Kingdom on a kind of a joint project. And one of the benefits is that we'll kind of all be in it together. But I believe that there is going to be some poll data collection that's going to be necessary for that project.
Is that something they can do in-house, or is that something they can do in-house?
I don't know. I'm unclear on that. We're going to have a meeting this evening, and
Okay,
I'll be finding out more. I can let you know when I do find out.
so I'm Chair, I'm ready to learn more about pole harvesting.
Okay, Commissioner Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm reminded that Clay's presentation was cut short. He actually had several slides that go to the questions that are being asked right now about how poll data is collected and what the utilities do and don't do with it. I don't know that you want to take the time at this point to go over that, but the slides are available to you and they answer many of these questions.
Okay, committee, do you want to take a look at those slides? I think we've got time. Okay, Clay, why don't you? I think, yep,
Sure.
you're still there. Okay,
Yeah, I'm
can
still
you
here.
pop those up?
Give me a moment to share my screen here. Is that being shared? All right, so I worked with my staff this morning just to put together a quick kind of presentation on the benefits of poll data collection. And when we talk about poll data collection here, or poll harvesting, I just want to be clear, we're talking about pre-construction poll surveys. So this is not the survey that happens as a result of filing poll attachment licenses. There is a survey that happens after you do that. You go out with the power company and the telephone company and take a look at the polls together. All right, is it still up?
Yes.
No, you-
Well,
Oh, we're losing you.
Yeah, all right.
Try again.
Just bear with me a moment. I think I accidentally closed it. My apologies for that.
You can get it back.
It's going. I just have to reload it. The computer is being very slow today. Anyway, while that's happening, oh, here we go. I also have a million things open right now.
Hi, I'm happy to share my screen.
Oh.
It's all right. I'll just
Play's
share
up.
it. Yeah, is it, you
There
see
we
it now? Okay. All right. I just can't switch slides very easily. All right, so like I said, when we're talking about poll data collection, we're talking about pre-application surveys, sometimes called poll harvesting. This happens before companies submit their poll license applications. When they do this, the data they're collecting generally involves very detailed data about the polls, such as what other attachments are on the polls, what's the number and the type, the condition of the poll, so does it need to be replaced, the height, which is important if you're going to add things. You need to know whether you're going to have to replace the poll again because it's too short, and the exact coordinates for the poll, and then perhaps other environmental considerations. If you have to go off-road through an easement, that can certainly add considerable time to construction, and you may want to know about that so you can plan for it and build those costs into your build. This slide just talks about what data we already have on polls. Before doing poll surveys, it's good to know what's already out there. For the vast majority of polls, VEC, WEC, and GMP, they already collect and publish with VCGI poll coordinates, so that's the lat and long of the poll ID number, so each poll has a unique ID, the poll height, and the number of attachments. It doesn't tell you what the attachments are, but it does tell you the number of attachments on the poll. All right. So why
can I
do
ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So
Thank you.
Clay, what you just said, if those are publicly available, then if I'm a CUD, I am virtually certain to be in those territories, if I understand it. And so what is, like, doesn't that take care of the poll, not the more detailed work, but at least the initial setup? What am I missing? Why are we talking about it different?
Yes, well, so I mean, I think I take a slightly different view from others on the value of poll harvesting. There is a place for poll harvesting. But whether we need statewide pole harvesting as a matter of course, I think should be discussed. So, I mean, why do this in the first place? One is to develop your pole applications. So you're going to submit your applications to the power company to go on the poles. It might be helpful there, but frankly, a lot of the data that's already available can get you there. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The next is estimating the network cost. So is this going to cost us money to build here? Too much money? Can we afford it? Can we get financing for it? And then improving network routes. Really what we're talking about is, it's just like buying a house. You want to have that inspection done before you commit to it in case there's something really horrible that you want to avoid. So when we're talking about pole harvesting for pole application, I would say this data is already there. We already have the majority of the data that you would need for most of the poles. Not all poles are included in that data set though. So we have poles owned by municipal electric, say, I don't think Hardwick is in there, or the other municipal electric companies. There might be poles owned by a telecom provider, you know, where there's no electric attachment and they might not be in there as well. So we're really talking a little over or under 5% of the total pole plant in the state. For getting network cost estimates, typically companies do engage in some kind of data collection on the poles to estimate make-ready costs. But they don't necessarily need very detailed data about what's on each pole or the condition of individual poles. They're going to come up with a cost average for those poles. So pole harvesting data can be very valuable for making your make-ready cost estimates more accurate, but they also aren't always necessary. But I think this is one of the motivations here, especially with the CUDs, is that this data would be very helpful in putting together cost estimates. The pole data collection for this, though, is really only necessary, though, if you plan on building in a particular area. So if we're talking about doing large scale pole harvesting efforts, I think one question is, are we going to use 100% of that data for build out?
But when you talk about large scale, is that when we were talking about the machine that could drive around and do large scale, and you're saying really, and are all the utilities, leave out some of the smaller munis, but we know GMP has told us they know where their poles are. And you're saying, and they know what's on their poles, and that's available. Does the Vermont Electric Co-op and the other major utilities have, is that same information available?
So this past year, the department and VCGI worked on a data reporting standard for poles, and WEC, VEC, and GMP, all three participated. So we're getting this kind of data from those three companies, and that is the vast majority of the poles out there. So
okay,
there's certainly going to be a few poles that are owned by municipalities, or maybe CCI still owns a few poles here and there that don't have electric on them. And then those, those poles are probably not captured in the database.
okay. But you're saying that the vast majority of information you'll need to do your initial cost estimates, you'll have to do more as you get ready, as you move into the make ready stage, but that for doing your basic engineering and cost estimates, that most of the information is publicly available.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, and I can just quickly go back to tell you, we don't get everything, but we're getting a lot of important information. So the coordinates of the pole, that's the lat and the long, where it is. The pole ID number, so GMP assigns a unique ID to every single pole. And then pole height, and then the number of attachments on a pole. So you would be able to find out from this data whether there is, in addition to the electric company, whether there are other telecom providers, which is important if you need to know what, guess what the make ready cost would be, because those are the attachments that are going to get moved. Let me jump down back here. So estimating network costs, I think we discussed that. I just want to hit home here that it's really valuable if you're doing the survey for the area you plan to build in. So if you don't plan to build in an area, the data is not going to be very useful to anyone.
right.
For network design, I would say the real value in kind of this deep dive into pole data is to really avoid bad situations or committing to serve areas that are going to exceed the cost that you're willing to pay. One example I would give is when the VTA was doing fiber in Bethel, there was significant flooding during Irene in Bethel, and in the wake of that flooding, GMP and Fairpoint eliminated a lot of poles in certain areas around the White River, and did a lot of undergrounding and changed routes and things like that. And when the VTA came in to do its fiber, it made assumptions that ended up being wrong about the placement of poles. And it caused them to design their network to go on electric transmission instead of distribution. And they had not adequately planned for the ongoing operating costs of that. So like attaching to transmission poles is significantly more expensive than attaching to distribution poles. So we were able to troubleshoot that when we were out in the field trying to hang the fiber, and we came up with a solution. But you run into situations like that, and this is an area where pole data harvesting could prevent what could be a very costly situation like that.
Okay.
Just like an inspection on a house would let you know that you're going to need to replace the furnace, and maybe you don't want to buy that house. Just quickly, because I know you're short on time, just some other considerations when you're discussing pole harvesting. The data is best used immediately. So if you're collecting large amounts of data, it quickly becomes stale. As soon as a drunk driver hits a telephone pole or a windstorm takes down some lines, things get replaced, things get changed. You have flooding, for instance. So the data quickly becomes stale. It's going to require the data to be actively refreshed and managed. If you're going to have a statewide kind of pole collection effort, you're going to need someone there to collect new data, constantly redo these surveys, and manage that database. If you do a statewide effort, the vast majority of the data would go unused because we're not going to build out to the vast majority of the state. We're really looking to solve a problem that applies to 25% of the state, people that don't have good broadband today. And then it doesn't actually save you all that much money on Make Ready, because as soon as you submit your pole licenses, you're going to have to do pole surveys again as part of the Make Ready process. So this data would not be a substitute for the Make Ready surveys that would have to be done as part of the pole attachment process. And then the last point, just to reiterate that WEC, VEC, and GMP do provide a substantial amount of pole data that's helpful in preparing pole applications and providing make-ready estimates.
Any questions for Clay at this point? And Clay, I think maybe you can take those down now and I can
Absolutely.
see the committee. Any questions? All right, Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Clay, this is just a placeholder for something that I just want to remind myself and you to talk to you about. When this bill came up a couple of years ago, I asked a question on the floor. I think Senator Brock presented this bill about poles that are left up that are no longer in use.
Dual poles, yes.
Old poles, is that what they're called? Wait,
Dual poles, yeah.
dual poles.
They've been
And
replaced and consolidated, or the telephone company didn't take down the old pole.
yeah, and there's still lines on some of them, but they're not in service. And in some parts of the state, I've had constituents complain to me about them. And this is a tangent, so I don't want to go over it now, but if you have any information you could send me about what you can or are doing about it, that would be helpful, because in some cases they're dangerous. They're kind of rickety and
Yes.
not
Yeah, it's been a long-standing issue, and we have dealt with it on several occasions, and they keep coming back. I think that we will see a stop to dual poles as now that GMP owns the vast majority of the poles. And I'll go back and look at the sale commitment, but I believe there was a commitment to reduce dual poles as part of that sale. So I'll go back and find out what that is, and I'll share it with you.
great. Thank you.
Information on that, I think, is part of a citizen request. I remember seeing information, it may have come from the commissioner on,
Yes, that was part of the response that I read into the record, and I'm happy to put that in front of Senator Hardy as well. There's also a complaint process, Senator Hardy, so if you have constituents who bring anything specific to you, just get in touch with us and we can take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner.
Absolutely.
do we have any more questions for Clay at this point? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move on to Jeremy Hansen and CV Fiber.
Hi there, I'm Jeremy Hansen from Berlin. I'm the chair of CV Fiber. I want to make sure that Christine's really great presentation has enough time, so I will try to be fairly quick. CV Fiber is pretty early in the process of doing our pole surveys. We have contractors ready to go. It's just essentially just contingent on funding at this point. I would echo what Clay said about, I don't think we really need a statewide effort for pole collection right now. Most of the CUDs are far enough along, are as far as CV Fiber, and are indeed as mature as CV Fiber in that respect. The projects are already on the runway. I mean, these are folks who, groups who already have, in some cases, started doing the pole audit, or have those contractors in the pipeline to do so. And so I'm also looking at the expectations, the data standard that we've put out for the folks that we are going to be contracting with to collect the pole data. So while there is state data available with those 4 data points, there's also an additional, we're asking them essentially to collect an additional up to 43 other data points per pole. And so, yes, we do have to go back. There is the utility ride out after the pole attachment license application. But we really consider it to be an essential part of our pre-engineering and indeed the engineering of the network, that if we don't know some of these things, it's the responsible thing to do for us to know these ahead of time, because we don't know what we don't know. So until we get that data back, we can't really make good decisions about the actual route of the network. And I think, and Clay alluded to that, it's just that we want to make sure that we have a complete and clear picture of what the status of those poles are before we do anything at all, before we invest any of the public funds that we have been and we're being entrusted. Going back to WEC, WEC's data on their poles is okay. It's not great, and because we're actively partnering with them, this is going to have some nice effects for WEC member owners, because we are collecting this data and handing it right to WEC as part of our memorandum of understanding, part of that process. And as I understand it, EC Fiber and NEK Broadband is doing the same. So WEC's data will be better at the end of this, and they will have all of these data points there as well. For our first phase project, which is essentially what we were going to be building over the next 3 years on a much more modest scale before we had any idea that there was federal funding coming down the pike. We were, we had this process in mind, but it's mostly WEC poles. It's mostly underserved DSL locations, and then a few hundred GMP poles. As I understand it, the GMP pole data is better, and we will probably have to do less work to access those or to survey those. But where we're at right now is we have 3 contractors ready to go. We essentially just need to give them the give them the specifications for what we want them to do. They'll send us bids, and then they'll be ready to go out the door very quickly. Having that data in hand is going to help us make sure that the make ready costs and the make ready time goes as quickly as possible. That in my eyes is the biggest question mark in terms of at least our phase 1 project, about how quickly the overall project can go. So having good data at the outset is going to give us a good project throughout the lifespan of what we're trying to do. So even though we initially budgeted, so if you look at our, where CUDs are, obligated by statute to publish their budgets to all of their member towns every year, and our budget for this year was quite small, essentially just looking at some of the VITA money, a part of the $4 million VITA loan we were looking at, and then 10% matching funds from the state that came from a bill that you passed in the last biennium. So thank you for that. And what this additional influx of funding allows us to do is essentially kind of take a bigger piece and compress the projects into basically all of the projects that we were thinking were going to take maybe 5-10 years and potentially do them in 3. But the pole auditing, it really can't be divorced. It's such an important part of the process that we really can't divorce the preparation from the actual construction. And if I could for a moment just stand up on my soapbox and say, asking us to do just planning and then not have the follow-on budget for construction puts the bigger project at risk of delays and cost overruns. I wanted to quote Jeff Such from Southern Vermont CUD, and so he was mulling over the idea of funding for this part of the project without having funding for the next part of the project, and he was wondering, how is a private sector entity, whether it's one of our partners or one of our vendors, how can they commit to a multi-year build? These projects take more than one of our fiscal years and more than one of Vermont's fiscal years. How are they going to commit to a multi-year build with only a year of funding in place? So I would hope that the committee would see the wisdom in looking at these projects as entire projects, not as individual pieces that we can fund this part now and sort of Lego the next piece on top and Lego the next piece on top. It's much more tightly interwoven than that. So yeah, like I was saying before, all the other CUDs using what they've learned from the Broadband Innovation Grant, what they've had experts telling them about, are essentially, like I said before, essentially ready and able to go and move forward with this process too. So yeah, so I mean, unless you want to talk more about the planning money versus construction money, which to me is not really separable, I think I'm going to leave it here because, like I said, Christine's presentation is really
Okay.
a lot better.
Senator Pearson, do you have a question? And Senator McDonald.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you. It sounds like you're getting bids in, but can you give us a crude estimate of what kind of budget we're looking at here for the
But
poll survey?
sure. So for our phase one poll survey, if I can get to, and this was in some testimony that I had submitted when I was last in here. Pardon me for a moment while I bring it up. I believe for our phase one, I want to give you the right numbers for miles and such. Stand by. For our phase one, we're looking at about 127 miles. We're looking at between $90,000 and $100,000 for that process, and then we have kind of forecasts for what it might be if we can condense our phase two and phase three into the first couple of years as well.
So 200,000 anyway for the first three phases for just the poll survey.
More like 250 for our entire. Yeah.
The reason I ask is last spring we had a testimony from folks that were thinking of this as a sort of Job Corps almost idea of democratizing it with an app and sending people out there. And I must say that appealed to me as a grassroots organizer kind of history in my background. And it does actually seem to me a potential, and everybody gets tired of legislators telling them to think of things they've never thought of or have already dismissed with. But because we're talking about CUDs, because there is, in FX's territory, people were writing $2,500 checks. It doesn't seem that far-fetched to me that you could have 3 weekends with 50 volunteers and a smartphone app and just do it in actually a very constructive, community oriented way. And I just, is that totally unrealistic? Have people considered that? I mean, if we had an extra 200 grand, that would be significant in terms of where we're at, but maybe I'm totally unrealistic. Just appreciate your thoughts.
No, thanks, Senator Pearson. It is a good thought, and I really like the idea of crowdsourcing. I mean, there's a long string of successes in terms of getting people that maybe aren't specifically experts or paid people to do this sort of thing. So there's a lot of citizen science out there, for example, that I pay a lot of attention to. I think that could work if we had essentially pulled the trigger on it last time around. We're talking about needing this information in June and July. If we could spin up an app and get the volunteers and deal with the liability issues of having random volunteers wandering through the woods on our behalf along utility pole rights of way, but perhaps, I mean, I don't think that's unsolvable to get us the data that we need by the beginning of summer to actually start doing engineering and start making use of it. I'm honestly, I don't know how it could work. Maybe more remote places that we are not going to get to for a year or so, we could sort that out. But yeah, it would be wonderful if another $200,000 was available for pushing down prices. I mean, that would be, if we're saving money, it's lower rates.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Senator McDonald.
I'm trying to understand from the witness about the putting up fiber on poles. And I wanted to ask, the question was, if you were to submit a bill to Green Mountain Power to put up fiber on their poles, and a competitor were to offer offer them more to do that, or to give them a better deal for putting up their 25.3 on those poles, according to the current statute or law, who would Green Mountain Power be free to pick from either of those entities?
No, so what we're asking for doesn't actually require any partnership or any relationship with the utility that owns the pole. I mean, they're obliged to make room on the poles following the process for us to attach. So if Green Mountain Power wanted to use some of the space on our fiber for their own uses, they could, but we're, in these cases, we're asking, we're paying for them to, to go out and look at the poles, move all of the other stuff, that all the other attachers down if they're doing it, or have the other attachers do that. And then we will have our own construction crews, our contractors, come out and put that fiber up. So
Okay, so they cannot say, we will not do you, we're going to do some big national company and you can't attach.
unless I'm misinformed and don't understand the rules of the PUC and all the regulations that are out there right now. I mean, as far as I know, I guess I would defer to the commissioner or to Christine about that, who have more experience specifically there.
I tried that earlier. I got shut off. So
No, that's not what you tried earlier. Commissioner, can a utility deny access to a pole?
There's a rule that governs attaching, and standards go with that rule. And so they do process the application, and if the application is not in the utility's judgment consistent with the rules, they can deny it. That, however, can go to the PUC for review. It's ultimately the PUC that decides, not the utility.
So if I want to attach, there are certain rules that my application has to abide by, but all things being equal, everybody goes up.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
if it's feasible, that's correct. And my point is that the ultimate word does not rest with the utility, it rests with the PUC.
So my question was that if the witness we're listening to now were to make an application at the same time, and independent provider made an application to go up on those poles, who makes the decision, and how long does it take to make the decision on which of those two applicants goes up on those poles?
So what you're contemplating is a hypothetical where only one can go up and two have made application. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right.
Can I-
Okay. There's Clay, in just a second, there's generally speaking a first in time principle, but if there, obviously there's a limitation to space on there. If there's a controversy that develops, as you've suggested, and it can't be worked out by the utility and the applicants, if need be, it goes to the PUC for resolution.
Otherwise, it's the first one to show up.
That's generally speaking, first in time is the principle. It's like in property law. Go ahead, Clay.
I may have missed the initial question, but multiple providers can go on the pole. The attaching entity pays for the make ready and all the costs associated with it. So both providers can go on a pole. If there's not enough room, the pole gets replaced with a bigger pole. I don't think there's ever been a situation where a pole set has been maxed out to the point where carrier has been disallowed from being on the pole. They may have chosen not to because of the cost of replacing poles, but they're not going to be disallowed by the utility or by the PUC.
Madam Chair, I'm simply trying to understand what is going to happen and how the recent PUC ruling on something that we didn't know about affects our current challenges.
Okay, that recent rulings is another. I think we've gotten what goes on here. I would like to move on, if we have no questions for Mr. Hanson, to move on to Christine, because I'm told that there's a very good slideshow in the offing.
Yeah, thank you.
Christine, I don't know if you're muted, but
Disappoint. So,
Not hearing you though.
oh, you're not hearing me. Hang on.
There you are. Okay.
Okay.
are you Starlinking?
Well, you should know I'm Starlinking and I'm bonded to a DSL.
And you're out again.
Still has problems.
Ah,
My
there you go.
Starlink connection,
Okay, let me,
my Starlink connection went out too, by the way.
yeah,
You're backed out. All right.
let me just do a quick check here before I, of my network. All right, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
Just stay in that one position and we can hear you. No, now we can't hear you.
Oh, Jesus.
Now we can. All right.
Hang on a second.
Let's put up the slides and hope they have subtitles.
Well-
Yeah, okay, let's go.
Maybe turn off your video. That sometimes helps us.
Okay.
I know. Turns off her video. Can we see the slides?
Probably not. Let's just try to muddle through this. Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. I want to start out with something too, because, you know, one of the things that happens, you know, we've all, those that have been around for a while, have seen a number of technology revolutions. And there's kind of an adage, an old, you know, saying in technology revolutions. You know, when you get a technology revolution, those people that are holding on to the existing technologies fight it the most. And they fight it the most because they've got money invested in those assets. You know, let me, presentation, there we go. I don't want to start with the end. Scroll all the way, sorry about this. So, you know, we're witnessing that today. We're seeing those people that are holding on to this existing technology try to maximize the return on their assets. But, you know, the fiber revolution is going to overtake this no matter what these people who have existing technology are trying to do. So when I speak here, I should also let you know that I'm also the administrator for Lamoille Fiber Net as well. And Lamoille Fiber Net has completed a pulse study, and I've looked at their data, and it's nice that we have some of the towns. You know, we've got, in NEK, we have 4 towns that don't have poll data, but I'll talk about how the poll data fits into the entire planning process. But I just want to make a couple points as we get started. You know, we spent a lot of money 10 years ago with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And we keep going down this path where, you know, we're trying to do the same thing over and over again. And it's just not going to work, you know, and I'll show you later why it's definitely can't work with using private incumbent telecom companies. And of course, you know, I admire the work that you've all done, and I admire the work we've done for years on this. You know, this is a thorny problem, so it takes time to fix. So you know, many of us have been in this for a long time, and we're not giving up. But, you know, the governor and the House have doubled down on the CUDs. And, you know, some of the ISPs talk about a disadvantage that the CUDs may have. When it comes to rolling out broadband, we're all going to face the same issue, and it's going to be labor constraints. You know, whether you're a small ISP or a CUD or even a big company, we're all going to face that labor constraint issue. It doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are. And I got to tell you, some of the smaller ISPs, without the coordination with the CUDs, aren't going to expand beyond their territories. And if you delay funding right now, I'll show you later, we're already starting the work on 8,247 passings at a total construction cost of somewhere around 19 million in the Northeast Kingdom. So any delay will actually make that not happen. So let me go through the process. I'll quickly go through the process to hear how the poll data falls in. Now, I'm going to say it was nice. I took a look at recent poll data that was acquired against the existing database that GMP and VEC has. And what I'm finding is there's greater than 99% linear accuracy. I actually took and evaluated 117 polls and looked at the difference at 24,500 feet. There was about a 500-foot difference, which in linear, that was kind of a lateral accuracy. In linear, it's greater than 99%. So GMP and VEC has a really good, solid database, one that, you know, I'm really happy to work with. So we start with that database when we're doing our design work. But let me say a minute about consolidated poll data. we may be missing, 5 or 10% of the poles because they're consolidating. But I'm going to avoid them like the plague because they're short, they're terrible shape, they're old, old 35-footer poles, and the rights of ways are horribly overgrown. Now, if we have to go into those rights of way, we might, but it's going to cost money because you're going to have to clear those rights of way in order to get to use them. So I will thank the legislature and all the people that did the work ahead of me for getting that VNC and GMP poll data out there because it's very valuable. And but again, I want to repeat that we've got 4 or 5 municipals in our communities that don't have poll data. Lamoille Fiber has done the poll data for their towns, and it was nice when I got into their database to find out that poll information was there. Because once you got that poll data, you can do a lot from your software. So you start with your poll data. The next step is you pick your route. So you just draw a line, connect pole to pole, see how long it is. And then the next step is you throw on all the hardware. And once you throw on the hardware, you've got an estimated cost for that route. You can do the budget, and this is what's called high-level design. Now you take that high-level design and you basically repeat this through your whole system. And you develop a system-wide cost estimate. And that cost includes all these things. You look at make-ready costs. That's one of the big ones. Construction labor, traffic control, all the materials. So it basically, you get a really good system-wide cost estimate. And what you do is you take data that's, we're working with NRTC, the National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative, that keeps their database alive. They're working with rural areas all across the country. So you to start to develop a pretty high level of confidence in those cost estimates. Now we repeated this to the entire system of 57 towns. We may only have 35 towns right now, but if we're going to do this work, let's do it for all 57 towns. So any town that joins us, we're already going to have it built. And then let me make an even more important point here. Not only do we want to design within our system, we want to design outside of our system, which is why, you see me right now being the administrator for Lamoille Fiber Net and NEK. And I'm hoping that Northwest will kind of join this consortium, because what you want to do is you want to build these resilient rings that go out. When you look at when you drill down in this, you're going to see a whole bunch of rings. Those rings of fiber are called resilient rings, and they provide you the reliability and the redundancy you need. I'm even getting to the point saying, let's make sure we got a connection with Canada. So we can actually, if we get an outage in the United States, we can go through Canada. Because telecom, and this, from my old hat, working in the utility business, telecom is a safety issue. Back in 2011, I'll never forget when we got on this national call, and the hurricane was coming, and we were told to prepare for a telecom outage. That was 2011. Our faces went white because we're like, what do we do if we don't have telecom? Telecom is more important than electricity right now from a public safety standpoint. So, and yet telecom hasn't been developed with the same level of attention that our electric networks have been built. We all get upset when we have an electric outage, and maybe people in the home don't, all right, I lose my network for a few hours, but from a public safety standpoint, we cannot lose networks anymore. So we've got to think about geographic redundancy. We got to think about power redundancy. And when we're doing network design, we're looking at what we call GPON. We look at GPON. I want to use a passive network as much as possible because I don't want to have to worry about power supplies failings on my network. An active network requires power systems, and that impacts your reliability. So, and then beyond that, now we get into the issue that we face with some of the smaller ISPs. We want to have human redundancy, because the last thing you want to do is have a network fail and only have one person who can handle it. So once you've got your costs, now you develop your business case. You're looking at the number of passings, and we separate those passings into residential, commercial, and enterprise, because those have different revenue streams associated with them. We look at take rates. What you're going to see when I show you the next map is anything over 20 per mile is covered by cable. The incumbent providers know that, okay, if I got an area that's over 20 per mile, I can make some money there, but I can't make money when it gets below 20 per mile. So you got some incumbent providers that are serving at 15 per mile. So we kind of look at that at a different take rate. But 10 miles per less, the incumbent providers aren't going there. And why would they go there? Because they have to make a profit or they go out of business. You don't make a profit when you get to 10 per mile or less. And then we have to take into consideration what is the rate of growth, the time expected to achieve that take rate. Because if you're at 20 per mile, and we're using a number of 18% penetration, you're not going to get there the first year. It's going to take you a couple of years to get there. 10 miles per less, we're looking at take rates up approaching 50%. Expected revenue per customer, that's how many customers do you have as the number of passings, the total houses you pass times your take rate. So, and then you got to take into your costs, customer service, administration overhead, debt service, bandwidth, all those things in order to develop the business case. So we've done all that at both Lamoille and NEK. And in NEK, we're actually here at phase 1. And let me talk to you about, this really comes from the work we've been doing as a CUD. What's the model look like? FX talks about the power of going to the bond market, and we can go to the bond market, but we've got to build a strong financial case to get to the bond market. So year 1, this influx of money for the CUDs helps us build a strong financial case. If I look at trying to serve that, we're not looking at less than one customer per mile, but we're looking down to one customer per mile. We can get there with grant funds, but if we don't get grant funds, we probably can't get below 5 or 6 customers per mile. So year 1 until we build our asset base with grant funds, a key foundation for all the CUDs is the CUDs will, I'll speak for Lamoille and NEK. We pick the areas that provide us the best financial performance. And we've done that at NEK, and we've done that at Lamoille Fiber as well. Now, phase 2, you can actually leverage your existing assets, not like you can with if you were a steady company, but you can borrow up to 40% on your assets. So now year 2, you take and go out and borrow to build up so for example, if we start with $40 million in grants in year 1, we can leverage that for $16 million in loans in year 2. Now we can build a $56 million plant. And then by the time we get to phase 3, where we've got 3 years of financial history to go to the bond markets, we've got a network that provides the return. So, without funding from age 60 of the government proposals, we don't get to pass go and, we don't pass go collect $200. We don't get past phase 1. It's very important for us to start right away and start building that financial strength. That's so important when you get to the bond market, as FX talked about early on. So here's a typical timeline. I wanted you to see this because this is really important. And this gets to some of the make-ready questions. You spend a couple of months with proposal development, we get our board approvals, then we spend some time obtaining the funding, spend about a month getting into engineering design. But look at this make-ready time. We're talking 75 plus 105 days. So it's make-ready analysis and then make-ready construction. That timeline, it's almost like a law of physics there, because it's going to be hard to change that because it requires first-class line personnel to do the make-ready on these utility poles. So we all have to be very careful about how we prioritize the work of the labor of those utilities, because the utilities have a capacity constraint that you really probably can't change. And then we do customer connections and final inspection verification. You're looking at a 16-month cycle there. So I'm begging you, please don't interrupt that cycle. It could be catastrophic. Let me just talk about this for a minute too. Overbuilding, this happened. This is all throughout our district. the highlighted area shows you a typical town. The blue dots represent those areas that have been served by cable. That's we're going to hit those 20 customers per mile, and we're not going to serve the rest. The problem is when we go to serve those areas, we have to string fiber through those already served areas to get to those unserved areas, the green addresses. That means we add lots of fiber miles to serve few addresses. When we go through those cable areas, maybe we're going to get an 18% take rate. We're going to get an 18% take rate in the cable areas in order to get to those areas that are, by the way, those green dots in our system right now, we're averaging 6.5 customers per mile. So we got to string fiber through those already served cable areas to get those 6.5 customers per mile. So we got to stop the cherry picking. And the way to stop that cherry picking is to put the CUDs, in control, because they, we'll make sure those last customers get served. That's our goal. I want to make some points here on the summary. Fiber optic is the only technology that's future-proof. All others don't even come close. And I can go to the physics of that, but if you look at how much data you can get through, it's related to frequency or wavelength, and light has about, I think it's 10 to the 9th times the wavelength is radio frequency. So even when you talk about Starlink uses radio frequency to communicate those satellites. So they're limited by their ground stations. Vermont and the other 8 CUDs, we've learned from EC Fiber's history, what took them 10 years to do, we're going to do under 3. Our goal is to get every address connected. And by definition, the private providers can't do this. And the current system of pleading with them to reach the other system hasn't worked. So why would you assume that would change now? The VCBA has an important role. It's about coordinating, sharing resources, and propagation of the best practices. Affordability is tremendously important. The first thing we need to do for affordability is get the cost of entry down as low as possible. And of course, grant funding will help us do that. But what is the affordability model in place already for the incumbents? Well, they don't have one. So be careful when you hear the rhetoric on that one. So as we address this challenge, I recommend we do it right and we use a future-proof solution, which fiber to the premise is the only future-proof solution. So that's my presentation.
So Christine, you've talked about, several people have, the legislature putting our foot in it somehow. Can I assume that what I'm hearing is that if we just give you money for planning or for your first year, you can't get the commitments you need the guarantee of since we're dealing with 3-year use of the ARPA funds, that you need us to dedicate, we may not dispense it all at once, but to say you are funded for this entire project, then you can use that going out and your contractors know it's not a 1-year deal and then you got to see what we do next year. Because I don't know why they don't trust us, but somehow they don't. You need the full 3-year or whatever the plan is, but you need full funding for the project. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we need the commitment. The commitment.
All right. Yeah, we're not going to give you the cash, but we'll commit it. All right. Sandra Pearson.
I really appreciate the presentation and a couple of questions. If you've spent any time watching us, you've heard my good friend Sarah McDonald ask people, what do you mean by broadband? We talk about 25/3, we talk about 100/100. Are you saying that we should stop talking about those kinds of things and talk about fiber?
I am saying that, yes. Because again, bring a physicist in to explain it to you, but there's just no comparison between you can get in terms of long-term data bandwidth.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Is there anything, it's your map with the cable overlay is really helpful. So one thing I want to just check my assumptions, and Madam Chair, just forgive me, but we're going to be writing a bill very quickly or tweaking a bill.
We are. And we may not be getting a break today, but I think this is more important.
So while the incumbents avoid the 10 per mile, there's a level at which am I right that you're attracted to that because you'll get a bunch of them? You will get almost 10 of them, or you'll get 8 out of 10 instead of 8 out of 30. Is that, am I right in understanding a little difference?
Yeah. So if you look at the take rate of that 10 per mile below, it's approaching 50% and even higher over time, but especially if you're using fiber. Now, the problem is, however, even if you got, 100% take rate, it's still not attractive to a private provider.
Yeah.
Because the business case doesn't pan out.
And in terms of you have to go parallel to where the cable is or overlay or whatever. Is there anything that prevents you, or is it just a philosophy of your business? When you do it, I'll ask it this way. When you go by my house in the middle of nowhere that I've already got cable, and I switch, Comcast will come in and they'll tell me it's only $29.99 a month for the first 6 months and blah, blah, blah. And it'll hurt you guys, because people will switch back, because after one visit from the person, it's effortless from the homeowner's perspective. And it stinks. And I saw it here in Burlington with Burlington Telecom. Is there anything that prevents you guys from doing kind of the same thing? You don't need take rate. You're not anticipating take rate. So why not offer people a lower cost option to get them to switch from cable? Or are you already doing that? Or is that anathema to your mission?
So let me just tell you that across the country where fiber has gone past cable, and it's been a reliable provider, that they get 35% to 40% take rates. We're planning at an 18% take rate just to address the issue that you're talking about, because there's going to be a level of churn for years until it gets to the point where people realize, look, there's no way you're going to compete with fiber. It's just going to take time to get there. But yes, if you go over a 10-year period,
Okay. Starlink may have
versus Netflix, right? It's
okay. My last question. I've thought of this, by the way, I don't know where anybody got the idea that we're going to hit pause. I pity people that watch Senate Finance with any regularity. It's a fun and exciting experience to be part of, with a slight side of torture. But I don't believe any of us are interested in pushing pause. We want to get money out. It's one of the most grassroots points of in the political process that I've ever experienced. People say, where are you going to do broadband? My question is, I've hoped that the federal money that the state's considering giving to CUDs could be leveraged, as we've all talked about, for private financing. And in my simple mind, that's sort of been a pool of money that you have in the bank, almost like a reserve. But you're suggesting it's more like money that you use to build, and then you have a permanent asset. Is that the only way that you contemplate using this money in terms of a leveraging down the road asset?
Yes, I think that's it. You've got to have assets to leverage borrowing and leverage bonds. Forgive me, I shut the camera off because I want to make sure my bandwidth is solid. But that's, yes, we've got to build assets, and we leverage those assets for loans and bonds over time.
Terrific. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the indulgence.
Did I have someone after Senator Pearson before Senator Bray got his very obedient yellow hand up? Okay, Senator Bray.
I'm going to unmute before I speak. something I've learned this year. So I wanted to just quickly go through a checklist, sort of, Ms. Halquist, that came out of our committee work in the last couple of weeks. And it was, the first thing on here was sort of using and to see if one, you think the checklist is on target, and two, if you feel like the program you're proposing or discussing meets that. And so first was like this using a utility mindset was what I ended up calling it, building for durability. So that it is a 30+ year infrastructure investment. So let me pause on that one.
Oh, you want me to comment on that?
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah. So I should tell you, at Vermont Electric Co-op, we were using fiber, and I won't say the private providers, we were sharing fiber with private providers that was built in the 70s. So it's a timeless investment. So you got to think about, how are we going to maximize this? You got to think 40 years out. So yes, of course, durability and resiliency and reliability need to be part of our entire state plan.
Okay. Another thing was, and this really grew out of one of your earlier visits, talking about the engineering specs that came out with rural electrification, and it was adopt the appropriate industry standard and required use by any entity provided that's funded by this program. So is there such a standard, so that when we know that anyone who gets this money, they build to the same standard, and that these things will play nicely with each other as they reach borders and all the rest?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I got to be careful about being too pure on that. But we've had discussions, as last night we had a long discussion with some of the other CUDs about what our standard should be. It's important we agree to a standard. Now, the existing, for example, EC Fiber, who may be adding 300 miles to a 1,500-mile network, that they can't really be forced into a standard because it doesn't necessarily work for them. But as we build future builds, let's agree on what a standard should look like.
Okay. Require the ability to evolve and upgrade at the design and engineering level, so that, again, with an idea of future-proofing, as people have been calling it.
Yep, we've been having those discussions as well at CUDs. It's the
Right.
idea is, we're building these GPON networks. Can EPON be upgraded to GPON and vice versa? And GPON E as we move forward. So that's all going to be part of the discussion.
Okay, and I suppose this one's a bit redundant. It says require interoperability so that no funded entity becomes an island.
Again, that ties to the standards. We need to make sure we don't have to. So this is about making most effective use of your fiber bandwidth. If everybody has to have dark fiber for their network, it becomes an expensive solution, and and you run out of fiber. But if we can agree on the standards and optimize the fiber that we have, we're going to be better off.
Right. Another one, require open access to the infrastructure.
That's a tough one. And yes, that should be our ideal. And I think it's the ideals of many of the CUDs. The problem, of course, is, can you get an ISP provider to go into these areas with 10 customers, 10 passings per less, without some type of protection? So it really gets down to make this public infrastructure. Maybe the better term is to talk about public infrastructure that ultimately over time can best serve the public. So the CUDs, by the way, would have performance standards. And if you fail to meet those performance standards, you find someone else who can.
Okay. On the state side, that their primary role is one of technical assistance, so design, engineering, permitting, legal, marketing, and that sort of like they're coming closer and closer to delivering turnkey services to all the CUDs or whomever else we end up partnering with.
Yeah, so for example, there's a few of us that know how to use GIS and can do all that work, but that's not a skill that everybody necessarily needs. You provide that as central service, and you're going to be better off. again, that's why we're working with Lamoille FiberNet and trying to bring Northwest in. It's because, why specific engineering skills, we shouldn't all go hire an engineer. We can share an engineer between the CUDs and at the state level, there are specific skills that maybe could be shared across all the CUDs.
Right. State of Vermont and the feds provide funding, although you've demonstrated that that's not only that kind of funding. State of Vermont can provide a mechanism for managing entities and questions relating to rights and responsibilities of entities and the relationships between them. So are we currently set up to manage, does the state, in your mind, have a role in making sure that publicly funded entities, CUDs, for instance, that they have rights and responsibilities, and that state helps manage it, those relations, that one, you have to live up to those rights and responsibilities, and two, that you manage the relationships between different CUDs that are going to be abutting?
Well, I hope we're all working in good faith as CUDs, and I believe we are at this point. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in trust but verify as well. So, I mean, I'm saying that's your philosophy.
Okay.
But the point is, I think that's the role of the VCBA. You've talked about having this VCBA role. The VCBA role, providing that technical support, the oversight, and if there are, CUDs that may not necessarily be playing well, they could step in.
Okay, only two more. The state ensures that entities have provisions for mergers, acquisitions, and closures, including to the degree desirable, recovery by the state of its investment if they're not yet fully depreciated. Is that something that's been contemplated?
Well, I think so. This gets down to the measures, times interest, earnings, return, and debt service that FX was referring to earlier. Our lenders are going to ride herd on us in order to make sure we're always meeting those requirements. So, and part of the VCBA is to have that financial reporting to make sure none of us are going off track, because you want to catch that early. But at the end of the day, just as you saw with Burlington Telecom, you're going to be able to recoup your costs over time. If any of us did it, in the rare case any of us would go belly up, the end of the day is you've got an infrastructure that's valuable. And if we're all if you've been following these financial requirements, you'll be able to recoup your assets.
Okay. Great. And then I had one that wasn't on that list that we shared with the committee, which was yesterday we heard about an entirely different technology approach as in active optical networks versus passive. And none of us, I think, has much experience or perspective on that one. Do you have anything you can share with us?
Yes, there's a big reason why not to build active. Well, there's two reasons why you don't build active networks in today's world, and is because, first of all, it's much more expensive. So you're not going to get to as many rural residents as you can. And number two, I go back to that public safety and reliability issue. It requires a lot more power supplies, and that, I'll tell you, when I was the CEO of Vermont Electric Co-op, there were generators out there, but when we had a power outage, half the generators didn't come on. So from a public safety standpoint, you want to build as passive a network as possible because that's the most reliable network. And oh, by the way, it's least expensive.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Along because we have blown through the break. And we have two more witnesses, and then we've got a pretty full agenda after that. So we have other questions. We will have all these folks back. I have Rob White and Craig Keller from the Agency of Transportation. And I think the question for you and why I've got two of you is we understand there's a lot of poles in the public right of way, and just what do you know about those poles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Rob White, Agency of Transportation, Project Delivery Bureau Director. And I have with me Craig Keller, and I think Craig's actually going to do more of the talking. When utilities come into a right of way, they are required to enter into an 1111 permit, which basically allows us to collect some data about their infrastructure in the highway right of way. So I'll turn it over to Craig and let him really talk about what sort of data we have on that infrastructure that's in our right of way, which I think is your main point.
Yep. Thank you, Senator. Can you hear me?
Yeah. we can.
All right, good afternoon, folks. Yeah, as Rob said, my section, Permitting Services, Craig Keller, I'm the Chief of Permitting Services. We issue work authorizations for virtually anybody that wants to work in the highway right away, and about half our applications are for utility work. So, as Rob alluded to, we get permit requests. So, you know, we probably have at this point thousands of issued permits and thousands of agency projects that have pieces of information on them about utilities. But, you know, these permits and projects span decades. So as we've heard earlier from Clay, you know, we would get very schematic information because when you're requesting to work in the right of way from the agency's point of view, you know, we want it done safely for the workers, safely for the traveling public, and we want to make sure the highway isn't, you know, damaged in any way. So the plans we get are really very, very crude. It just basically tells you where you're starting, where you're ending. Are you replacing poles? Are you doing overlashing? You know, we may have height and pole ID numbers, but you know, we really don't have very detailed information. We probably don't have height information or know if there's future, you know, space for people to attach. So we really receive requests when utilities want to work in the right of way. So all that surveying, planning work is done before they would really submit to the agency. So we don't have an inventory. We don't have any master plan that would show all the utilities in our highway right away. You know, that's kind of an overview, but I'd certainly be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay, so you don't have a database that we could use to substitute for pole harvesting because it's not it wasn't set up for that and it's not maintained that way. And we've heard that it's got to be recent data.
Exactly. It's not an asset for the agency. I mean, we you know, assume that the utilities obviously know, you know, their infrastructure best. You know, we're purely looking at it as a, you know, what are you doing in the right of way? When are you doing it? And, you know, we want it done safely, but yeah, we're not actively consolidating this and managing it. And, you know, we get several hundred utility permits a year, but they're from all the various utilities. So it's, you know, the data there's some recent data, but it's very fragmented. And it sounds like there wouldn't be much, I don't think there'd be much benefit of trying to, you know, consolidate it and glean useful information. It seems like that's, as far as from a poll point of view, is already being provided by the three major poll owning utilities. Yeah, the towns that have state highways through them, like Johnson and Morrisville and Hardwick, you know, those towns do have their own polls, but it sounds like that's a fraction of the polls in the state, and that, you know, surveys are required anyhow when they're going to be evaluated for, you know, the make ready costs and such.
Okay, any questions from the committee? No, thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Can I just
Mr. White,
add?
did you have, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, since, you know, we are talking about information on polls, I will say the Agency of Transportation has also over the years been talking about that type of information, because anything in our right of way is a liability, and we're learning that the more we know about it, the better we can manage that liability. And when projects come along, inherently we have to move utilities and utility poles, and so the more we know about that, the easier it is to manage. And this is something that pole harvesting or data collection is important to us as well. So, you know, we'd like to stay, you know, with this conversation.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, thank you, everyone that's here for this one. This has been helpful. Abby and Mark Peralta here. We're actually, this is the property tax questions, the impact of the request from the WEC and potentially other electric cooperatives to not be charged, not have to have their electric utilities pay property tax or be assessed. Senator Pearson?
Madam Chair, could you just, or somebody remind us, is that part of the House bill?
Yes.
I know we've been talking about it. Okay, thanks.
It is. That's why we waited. So Abby, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Would the committee like me to walk through what the exemptions do? I believe you had a walkthrough from Maria Royal, but I don't know if you went into any detail.
It's been a while, so why don't you walk us through the relevant sections here?
Great, so for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel. There are a few sections in H360 that create a new property tax exemption, and it provides different conditions depending on the taxpayer that would be taking the exemption. So the exemption would apply both to local and state property taxes. It would apply to broadband infrastructure that is owned. So this is the first type of exemption that is owned by an electric distribution utility and leased to a communication union district or to an ISP and internet service provider working in conjunction with a CUD. It would have to be primarily for the purpose of providing broadband service capable of 100 Mbps, symmetrical, and it would have to be constructed on or after July 1st of this year. The second exemption is for broadband infrastructure owned by an internet service provider, again, capable of the same service, 100 Mbps symmetrical, and it would need to be part of a plan to achieve universal broadband coverage in a community or CUD with unserved and underserved locations. It would need to have DPS approval of the plan, and broadband service would need to be provided under a contract between the ISP and either a CUD or a municipality that was not part of a CUD prior to December 1st of 2020. Again, there is this requirement that the broadband infrastructure be constructed on or after July 1st of this year. So this is only for new build out. In this language, there is no new definition for broadband infrastructure that's being created. What's listed here is taking the sort of, I don't want to say archaic, but the existing structure for property tax and trying to fit broadband into that. So what's listed here is broadband infrastructure, including structures, machinery, lines, poles, wires, and fixtures. So that's what's being exempted, and it's only what is new, again, as of July 1st, 2021.
Hey, Abby, excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Could you just tell us what section or page in H360 this stuff is on?
Yeah, so it starts on page 37. It starts on section 16, and section 16 adds the two new exemptions, which there are two because it depends on the provider. And in this section of statute, it would exempt this broadband infrastructure from both state and local taxation. So it would be against both the state and the municipal grand list.
But I believe we heard originally that this is only new construction after July 1st, so the towns aren't losing.
That's correct, Madam Chair. It's only for what is new. And let me just ensure that I'm giving you the correct effective dates as well. Yes, all of these sections take effect July 1st, 2021.
Senator McDonald?
And is it limited to new stuff that achieves the 100?
Yes, so all of the conditions that I was listing apply And that includes for both of these types of exemptions, the 100 Mbps symmetrical.
But not, it excludes lesser levels of service?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Pearson?
Abby, I support this, but how do we not have an equal taxation problem? Like if we are taxing the similar kind of infrastructure that's out there today, but we're about to exempt people that are building it after July 1.
I would have to get back to you. I'm not sure that there would be, but let me give that some more thought.
Might be a common benefits. We could
It's
end up.
very, I'm not sure if there is already, no, I'm not going to weigh in on that because I'm not an expert on what is already existing.
Okay. Any other questions for Abby? Jeremy, I don't usually allow witnesses to question, but throw it out there and I'll ask it for you.
It's not actually a question. I was going to address Senator Pearson's question. This is specific, not specific to us, but this is part of the relationship between CV Fiber and Washington Electric Co-op. It turned out that Washington Electric Co-op can get funding to do some of the construction as part of our collaborative project through RUS and other sources that we can't. However, if you then factor in the cost of the property taxes and them as a nonprofit entity, if you factor in that cost, it ends up being actually slightly more expensive than what we could get it for. So that was why we advocated for this in the House.
Yeah, no, I remember that. It's a compelling case.
I think the question is, can we tax, if Comcast wanted to run lines out to underserved and offer 100, I assume we might have to offer them the same benefit. The likelihood of that is probably not a game changer, but I can, that may be the one thing we'd have to do. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I realize that I was going to ask Abby, but I see that Mark is here, so he might have the answer to this. And I know it's on new stuff that doesn't already exist. So it's not like we're taking away property tax revenue that is already there. So I get that. But do you have any estimate about how much money this would be in foregone property tax revenue?
I can talk a little bit about it. I think the short answer is not a good one, no, but I can talk about why and in a minute. I can address it whenever you want.
Okay.
Okay, let's finish with questions for Abby and then we'll go on to Mark. Senator Bray.
Thank you. So Ms. Shepherd, does it make, I appreciate Senator Pearson's question, so we don't sort of find ourselves blindsided by something. Does it make a difference? Is it a valid distinction to say that this is municipal infrastructure and therefore in some way public and therefore in some way, it's legitimate to assess it differently?
I would just make the distinction that when it's a CUD that's operating within the jurisdiction of the municipalities that are part of the CUD, it is already exempt because they are government entities.
Right.
I want to go back and look at the common benefits clause and see if there could be any issues there. I don't want to answer off the cuff.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Abby? So Mark, will go on to you. Any estimates on property tax impact, which would be Ed Fund impact, right?
Yep. So I'm Mark Peralt from the Joint Fiscal Office for the record. First, I just want to reiterate the point Abby made, which is that this changes perspective. So there wouldn't be any hit on either education tax and municipal property taxes as a result of this existing revenues. It's only whatever gets built going forward. Okay, so there's no estimate about a current hit. Providing an actual estimate of the costs difficult for a few reasons. First, the build out of broadband is going to take a number of years. I've heard a lot of estimates. It's also possible that parts of the state will never be reached. So, and a real estimate would have to take into account the time this is rolling out, what happens to values over time and tax rates and that kind of thing. And I just don't have the capacity to do that going forward. Secondly, and I think Abby touched on this as well, some expansion will be taken, it'll be undertaken by different entities. And to the extent that CUDs, there are already municipal entities that are not subject to the tax already. So it's difficult for me to know if this would be undertaken by ISPs, CUDs, or electric utility operations. Third thing is that some of the property tax revenue that will be foregone would likely be offset by growth in the property tax base that would result from this. So for example, if you have broadband that's extended out to other parts of the state, it could improve rents and housing values, and it might spur economic development. So there could be offsetting benefits. We don't usually do a dynamic analysis of JFO, but I think it's worth pointing out here that first of all, to the extent that the development doesn't take place, there's no cost in terms of lost revenues. And to the extent it does take place, there could be some offsetting revenues going forward. Now, in terms of trying to come up with a real number, there was a 2019 feasibility study that estimated that the capital costs and variable capital costs and labor would amount to about $284 million statewide. When I looked at the study, it's difficult to use for the purposes of coming up with an estimate because they've mixed up capital costs with labor costs, and I can't tease those things out. So then I looked, and I think you probably had testimony on this on the Washington Electric Co-op's estimates. They estimated that they could do a build out over 5 years. It would cost about $22 million, and that they estimated the cost of the tax loss or the taxes that they're on the hook for right now would be about $500,000. I tried to extrapolate out from that number to a statewide number, but it's problematic because there's no real reason to think that Washington Electric's service area is identical to other parts of the state. But what I did do is I took the type of analysis that Washington Electric did to come up with $500,000. If I applied that to the 284, it comes out, the estimate comes out to about $6 million. Again, that's going to be a very high number because it assumes full implementation, when that implementation would actually take place over a number of years, and it includes labor costs in that $284 million. So I'm guessing, several $1 million, not tens of $1 million, several $1 million might be a hit. And again, only to the extent that it's successful in encouraging these companies to go out and develop broadband. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just want to say thank you, Mark. That answered my question.
Oh. Thank you. Senator Bray.
Yeah, it's just making me think of, Mr. Peralta was talking about offsetting revenues. Is there, I should know this, but I don't. Is there a tax on broadband service currently?
On the service, I didn't look at, I'm not sure. On property, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking of the service. So for instance, that the point of the build out is delivering service. If the service, when it's delivered, starts to deliver revenue back to the state, then there's an offset there. And I don't know if there is a broadband tax, honestly, because my telecom bill has enough lines in it. I'm not sure what tax is applied to what features of my bill, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Abby can answer that. You're talking about a sales tax or something on the service that's provided?
Yeah, on the broadband service itself.
I don't think so. Abby, do you know?
I'll get back to you. I haven't looked at this more from the.
I think that's part of what we're not allowed to do. That's under the FCC.
Freedom, possibly. I'll check with Maria Royal. This is more, as for the sales tax question, I'll look into that.
Okay.
The issue has been when you get your phone service, there's a tax on your phone service when it's over your cable. That's been a point of contention, but I don't believe we are allowed to tax cable service. That's part of what, but check that, Abby, but that's my understanding.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Is that because cable networks are interstate?
Yes, and it's reserved.
Right. So are all our CUDs going to be self-contained, all intrastate and therefore eligible? Anyway, it's just something in terms of putting it on the table as a possible offset. I don't know if it applies or doesn't apply, or if it's even desirable.
Okay. Committee, thank you. Any more, Abby or Mark? Okay, thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, I would be happy to provide a little bit more on the common benefits question, the equal protection concern, and I would be happy to put this into a more formal memo if anyone on the committee would.
That would be helpful.
Okay, great.
Just so we know before we put our foot in it.
Sure.
What we're doing.
So.
Okay.
Sure. Would you like me to address it now or do something?
Oh, have you found it?
I'm looking at another memo on a different issue that I provided the committee actually last session that I could just provide sort of the general framework. And the question last session was more related to property tax classification. In this, just looking at the standards of review for creating different classes or different benefits for taxpayers in general. So you have the proportional contribution clause, which is protecting an individual from unfair government action, whereas the common benefits clause is to protect the state from favoritism to individuals. So in general, the state is allowed to create different classifications and to create benefits. And the standard of review is that those benefits or classifications are neither arbitrary nor capricious, which is a fairly low standard of review. And I'm just looking at some different case law to show that as long as there can be shown that the legislative purpose bears a reasonable relation to the tax and that the scheme is fairly and equitably applied among like classes of taxpayers, it would be upheld. So I can provide this in writing, but just to put it out there that in general, the legislature has fairly broad discretion to create benefits along these lines without, triggering a constitutional issue or challenge.
Okay. Senator Pearson.
Thank you. And I haven't looked at the current bill, but I also wonder if we would be protective if we just worded it that when we said, when it's being strung in the service of a tax exempt CUD, just making it clear that it's sort of like it's like the CUD being able to pass along its tax exempt status to one of its vendors is kind of how I think of it. But anyway, thanks, Abby. I appreciate you helping me think it through.
Okay, committee. We're going to move on to H 431. We got to change. This is energy storage, and I don't know if Olivia Campbell Anderson here yet? I'm not seeing her.
Senator Cummings, this is Faith. I've emailed her twice and haven't heard from her, and she's not in the meeting. Would you like to take a break?
Yeah, why don't we take a 15-minute break? At 4:15, I've asked Commissioner Tierney or somebody from the department to come back and just give us kind of a legal framework for the whole Global Foundries thing, just so we know what the law is at this point. What?
You don't want to call that the SMOO application?
No, I do not. I got enough trouble with that. So let's take a 10-minute break.